is to take you through how to use LoggerPro, or the features of LoggerPro, to linearize data and to produce a graph that is acceptable for a lab report. So two things to talk about. So obviously, when we've done linearization by hand, which was the majority of your summer assignment, you had 5 or 6 data points. It was pretty manageable to do that with your calculator. But we will see, and very shortly, like next week or a couple days from now, that we will use LoggerPro equipment or sensors to collect hundreds of data points. And you certainly don't want to perform a linearization by hand using hundreds of data points. So we want to use the power of the LoggerPro for the data collection. So I'm just going to use 5 data points here, and this is what we're going to practice with. The process is the same for when we have hundreds of data points. All right, so we're going to start out with a simple experiment where force was applied to some compressible material and the length was measured. So force would be on our independent variable and length would be on our dependent variable. So I've already typed this in the X and Y columns just to make that a little bit more simple for us to look at. So I'm just going to slide this out of the way, and you can see that in the graph, it's already been populated with the data points. So as you type them in, they show up. And it's hard to see because this dot is really on the edge and this other little red dot is here. But we can see the shape of this graph already. All right, first thing you want to do is change the column headings. We don't want to deal with X and Y's. We want to use the variables that are relevant here. So I never want to see a graph that's X or Y. We want to use the relevant variables because that's a lot of what physics is looking at the relationships between these variables. So our X-axis is going to be force, so I'm going to type in force. I'm going to give it a short name. I'll just call it F, just the variable that I will use. And force is measured in newtons if you're not aware of that. There are definitely features here, pull-down menus where you can use Greek letters. We'll have a lot of Greek letters, upper and lowercase, and then you can do subscripts and superscripts. So you have some features there, some pluses and minuses. That's about it on the features there. So hit done on that, and you can see that the X-axis has already been updated to force, has a variable plus a unit, as well as the column headings. Do the same thing for the Y-axis, and that would be length. I'll give it a short name of L, and the units are going to be M for meters, and we hit done. So now we have a graph that works well and looks good. So we can see this relationship here. This looks like an inverse relationship, and if you recall from the summer assignment, this tells us what we need to what linearization we would need to perform in order to get a straight line. So if my data looks like this, if I graph y versus 1 over x, I am going to get a linear relationship. And this is so critical to what we do because we can interpret a lot of physical, quantitative information from that linear graph. So that's what our goal is and what we want to be able to graph. So on your calculators, you would take the inverse of your force value, but I want to show you how to do this with LoggerPro because we are going to have hundreds of data points and you want to be able to use this with LoggerPro. So you go up into the data pull-down menu and you go down and you can see new calculated columns. So I'm changing the data and I'm adding a column. So notice I stretched out my data column here so that I can see it populated. Don't skip this step because it is going to help you. Don't just call it calculated column. Give it the name that you want it to use. So this is going to be 1 over force because we're going to take the inverse of what's on our x-axis. The short name will be 1 over f. And then whatever you do to the variable, you're doing to the units as well. So the unit for force was newtons, so this is going to be 1 over newtons. So again, be mindful to make sure that you're following this step. All right. Now, the expression box, this is where you're going to tell it what to do. So you want to take 1 divided by, and you're going to pick the column of data. You can't type this in. You have to actually select it under the force, under this choosing the column. So 1 over force. So then that will kind of take you through there. If you wanted to square something, let's say I wanted to square force, that's obviously is not what we're doing here, but force, I can do that, and then I can do asterisk force to do force squared, or if I get rid of that, I can also do the shift caret and do a 2. That also will square the data. So those are kind of the 3 options that we've done. But as I mentioned, this one is an inverse relationship, so we're just going to do 1 over force. And then you click on done, and now it has populated that numbers, and you can see it has calculated 1 over the force. Now, nothing has changed over here. So if I wanted to I'll show you a couple of options. If I just wanted to graph length versus 1 over force, I can hover on the name of the force and I can click on it, and then I can choose 1 over force. And then that is going to give me my data. And you can see it's actually all scrunched up here, and we certainly don't want to look at that. So if I go under data, actually I forget where it is, analyze, I'm sorry, analyze, I can go to auto scale, and I can auto scale it from 0, and now my data is all kind of fills the length of the graph. This is a shortcut key right here to auto scale it. It won't scale it from 0. That's okay. It doesn't, I'm not super picky about the Logger graphs, but this isn't even scaling. You certainly, if you were producing a graph by hand, you would make sure that you had even scaling. But this one is okay. So I'm actually going to go back to just auto scaling it from 0. So, because that fits it really nicely. So you can see you have all your data set, you have your calculated column. If I click on the top here, I can see that you've done the new calculated column. So I'm done with that. All right, now to linearize it, if I want to linearize just a portion of the data, I can just grab just the portion of the data and I can analyze that data and do a linear fit for it and see how well it fits that linear line. So I can either, this is the shortcut key. If I hover on it, it says linear fit, or I can go under analyze and I can do a linear fit there. So either way, you're going to get that. So notice it puts these black brackets around here and just fits these data points right here. So on occasion, you may want to select just certain features of your graph that you want to make sure that's linearized because that's what you're interested in. But in this case, I'm interested in all of the data. So I'm just going to do a linear fit on all of the data. You can see the brackets here are actually going from my first data point to my second data point, and now it shows me the linear fit for the entire data. So this will give me the graph here. It'll tell me the length here. For some reason, sometimes it's weird, like I have a 1 over force would really be my x-axis variable. It tells me what the slope of that line is. It tells me whatever the y-intercept is. In this case, this y-intercept is very small. I could probably approximate that to be 0. And I can see I have a correlation of 4.9. So this is very linear data. So I'm very happy with how this data set worked out. So other features of the graph, if I just go anywhere in the graph and I double click, it can take me through the graph options. I can change a label on an x-axis. I can give it a title and give it, let's see, length versus force, or 1 over force, 1 over force. So I can give it a title here. I can click OK. So now I have a title on my graph, so there are different features. There are definitely things that you can use and play around to kind of learn a little bit more about the Logger Pro features. One of the other things you can do is you can insert a new graph if I wanted to see both of them. I can insert a new graph. It kind of defaults to whatever it wants to. So again, if I want to change what I'm graphing here, I click on the axis title, I change that to length and that force. This would show me my original data set here. Page, if I want to like align objects or anything, I can't really do that here. I'm trying to figure out the shortcut. There it is, auto arrange. So Command R will auto arrange them and kind of put them. I'm not crazy about this feature because I think these graphs are too squishy, or their aspect ratio isn't so good. So I'd much rather you see something that looks a little bit more like a real graph, so you can kind of grab them and slide them around. Again, this is basically how to take you through Logger Pro. This is what the expectation is for the 4 sets of data that I'm going to have you do for homework.